"You're hurting me," she gasped. The outlaw murmured, "Force is all I have left." The words fell between them like ice on a tin roof, sharp and cold, but they did not tell the whole truth. Murmured had never been a name anyone gave willingly. It was the sound people made when her real name would have brought them danger. She had learned to move like a shadow, to speak in syllables that softened hard edges. Tonight, under a bleak moon that made every fence post a ghost, she stood with her back to the barn wall and felt the outlaw's breath like a storm. The hook, the first shot of the night, had missed by inches. A riderless horse stamped near the corral, and the town's 2 lamps guttered as if afraid. Murmured had ridden into nowhere on purpose. A mail-order bride's papers lost, a letter that smelled faintly of gunpowder and lilacs, and a promise she intended to break. Instead, she found him, a man whose hands had the steady cruelty of necessity, whose eyes were mapless but memorized violence. They called him Rowan Blackthorn on wanted posters. The men who whispered about him called him a ghost. To Murmured, he was the man who could steal her silence and make her speak. The first 5 minutes of the tale unspooled like a rope being thrown. Murmured's wagon had tipped in a drift months ago, leaving her with frostbitten hope and a laugh that tasted of hay and iron. She had crossed paths with families. A Norwegian widow who taught her to stitch names into quilts, an Irish peddler who traded stories for soup, and a Lakota woman who pressed sage in her palms and taught her how to listen to the land. Every kindness had been a thin bandage over a deeper bruise. A father who vanished, a marriage promised then bartered away, and the seed of a fear that clung to her when night closed in. Rowan's arrival in town that night was not coincidence. Bounty hunters had followed rumors, and the sheriff kept an uneasy distance, because law in this part of the world was a thing that could be bought or broken with equal ease. Rowan's force was not only muscle. It was the habit of a life in which mercy had been taxed until it was gone. Yet there was something in the way he watched the stars that made Murmured think of a child tracing constellations on a ceiling far from here. The complexity of him is the cruel hook. Men like Rowan were not simply monsters or saints. They were weathered choices. As the story deepens, so does the world. The town is a smear of smoke and oak, with a feed store that smells of molasses and a saloon whose piano never learned a cheerful tune. An Apache drifter named Leaping Buck keeps to the riverbank, trading carved flutes for food and telling everyone who will listen that the land remembers. A young single mother, Maggie O'Connell, hides letters from men who claim the Sea of Ireland is kinder than this prairie. These lives collide when the winter threatens to take more than crops, when a blizzard comes like an old grudge. Murmured's conflict is not merely external. She hides an ache beneath her ribs. She longs for the steady, ordinary life that a mail-order marriage promised, and yet she fears the box that such an arrangement would build around her shoulders. She has been loved badly before, by a man who repaired fences with promises he never kept, by a preacher whose sermons were warm but hands were cold. Rowan's sudden presence forces her to ask a dangerous question. Can force be worn like armor, or does it only brand the soul? The melodrama turns on small, human acts. Rowan loosens a trapped rail, and his fingers, though rough, are careful. Murmured cooks a stew and offers it to a boy whose teeth are too small for winter. A sheriff named Calhoun carries a secret ledger of debts owed to the town, and his conscience is a rusty hinge that squeaks when opened. The hooks multiply. A secret letter, a broken locket, the shadow of a man from Murmured's past who returns with a claim. Part 1 ends on a bruise of revelation. In the snow, beneath a ledger of stars, Murmured finds a photograph in the outlaw's pocket, a small, frayed image of a woman and a child she did not know Rowan loved. Understanding flickers. Rowan's force is the answer to a debt, to a code that keeps him and those he loves barely alive. She does not forgive him. She does not run. Instead, she reaches, and the story closes this part with a promise, not of safety, but of more questions. The second dawn finds the town quieter in a way that bruised things are quiet, as if everyone is holding their breath to stop something from breaking. Murmured and Rowan begin a shaky dance of necessity. He needs her eyes and steady hands for a task only she could make clean. Forging a document to free a trapped family from debt. She needs the protection his reputation provides against the men who would see her sold like a rag. Their bargain is pragmatic, but it leaves room for more intimate currency. Stories shared beside a lantern, the way two people can measure honesty by the time it takes to tell a lie. Conflict escalates when a lawyer from the nearest railroad town appears, wearing a suit as thin as winter hopes. He brings news. The railroad wants the land that surrounds the town for a spur line, and men with ledgers and dynamite will follow. With the railroad will come change. Saloons turned grand, Bibles turned quieter, and people who do not belong becoming the new landlords. The town splits between those who accept the coin and those who remember the land as a living thing. Murmured senses the railroad's appetite like a wolf. It will not care for people's histories. Rowan reveals glimmers of his past. He was once an apprentice to a man who taught him to shoe horses and mend fences. That man taught him also how to take life when there was not another option. Rowan's child, the child in the photograph, was taken from him in a raid that left names and places as raw as new scars. Since then, he has been shaped by lawless choices. His murmured confession to her is not a plea for absolution, but an explanation. It is the kind of honesty that can start a complicated trust. Murmured wrestles with her own transformation. The Norwegian widow's quilting lessons become metaphors for piecing a life back together. The Lakota woman shows her how to read winter tracks and teaches the old songs that thawed a long-sleeping courage. Murmured trains herself to load a rifle with a hand that does not tremble. She learns to read men as one reads horses, by the way they stand before a storm. These changes are not sudden. They are a slow, aching work that the narration lingers on, drawing out emotion with every detail. The smell of gun oil, the half-healed scar on a palm, the taste of bread bitten without dessert. Romance blooms, not as a sudden turn, but in 100 small mercies. Rowan teaches Murmured to whittle a charm for luck. She, in turn, mends the coat he wears when he goes to town to ask about bounties. Their conversations often stop mid-sentence, full of things unsaid. Apologies, promises, threats of a future neither is sure they deserve. The audience is held by these fragile pauses. Tension arrives in the form of an outsider bounty hunter, Cullen Dre, who has tracks that match Rowan's tales. Cullen is the sort of man who believes in final accounts. He offers the town a ledger that says, "Bring him in, and you will be paid." The moral dilemma is sharp. Do they hand Rowan over and accept coin that could save the schoolhouse? Or do they shelter a man who has hurt them, but also save them from worse? Murmured's decision will bind her to a side, to the names she cherishes, or to a man whose force saved the day once. The second part closes on a desperate, romantic gambit. Rowan attempts to rob the train's payroll, not for himself, but to buy a woman's freedom and to pay off a crooked sheriff. The plan is a knife edge, and Murmured finds herself on the platform, hands at the ready. When a whistle pierces the dawn, hearts lean forward. The reader is left waiting on the precipice of action, the melodrama sharp, the stakes both money and mercy. The heist goes wrong in the way most human plans do, with small mistakes and a single, unforeseeable kindness. Rowan's gang is intercepted not by the sheriff, but by a group of children from the orphanage who have run to see the train, who scatter like startled birds. The chaos gives Rowan a choice: take the money and run, or protect the innocents. He chooses to shield them. His decision costs him blood and leaves him with a wound that will not close easily. Murmured tends to that wound with a care that surprises even her. She strips bandages, sings a lullaby the Norwegian widow taught her, and finds that the outlaw listens as if he had never known a soft sound before. In this part, tenderness is the heaviest weapon. The town's hearts are torn. Rowan's actions save the children, but the law still demands its pound of flesh. Cullen Dre tightens his net, and whispers turn to open accusations in the market. Cross-cultural threads weave through the narrative like durable twine. Leaping Buck, the Lakota carver, offers guidance. The land remembers those who act with the heartbeat of the earth. He and Maggie O'Connell form an unlikely alliance to protect families from the railroad speculators. The story leans into small, communal acts, a barn raising, a share of stew, a night watch that doubles as story time. These scenes are rich with detail. The way the moon catches on horses' manes, the creak of the water pump, the smell of tobacco and lemon in someone's pocket. Murmured faces temptation, an offer from the railroad's lawyer, a cleared homestead and papers that will secure her future if she testifies against Rowan. She imagines a life where the word murmured could be shelved and a true name spoken at breakfast. Yet the moral tangle is vivid. To betray someone who saved children is to let the law trade justice for convenience. Her internal battle rages silently, in the way she folds a letter and does not send it, in the tremor of her hand when she sips coffee. Romance reaches a point of sharp pressure. Rowan, weak from his wound, reveals a truth he has kept locked. He once loved a woman who escaped with their child to the coast, and his regret has been a chain he wears openly. He begs Murmured not for love, but for a place in which his mistakes might be repaid with something like grace. His plea is unromantic and honest, and as the scene unfolds, the listener feels the ache of two damaged people leaning toward hope. The climax of Part 3 is not an explosion, but a choice. When Cullen arrives with the sheriff's men, the town stands in the square like a collection of fragile true signs. Murmured steps forward and makes a speech, not legal or eloquent, but true. She speaks of children and quilts, of songs and tracks on snow. She asks the town to look at what they would trade for coin. The crowd, moved by simple truth, fractures the sheriff's resolve. Cullen is not satisfied. He promises a reckoning. The part ends with Rowan handcuffed, not by law but by his own acceptance. He will turn himself in if the town will fight for his cause. The fourth part opens with a quiet that is the eye of a storm. Winter thins to a bitter edge. The railroad's men bring clamorous machinery like a bad dream. The town is forced to show its mettle. Rowan sits in a cell that once housed a loose boarded store, and he writes letters, real, messy letters, to the woman in the photograph. Murmured reads them, learning the contour of his sorrow. The audience learns that redemption is often paperwork and the patience to wait for it to be processed. Justice is messy. The law that arrives is both blind and precise. It seeks a culprit to close the book. Murmured and a group of citizens, the widow, Maggie, Leaping Buck, mount a campaign of witness and care. They gather proofs of the railroad's coercion, of the sheriff's bribes, and show that the line between outlaw and protector is sometimes drawn by those who profit from confiscation. Melodrama finds its pulse in courtroom whispers and saloon confessions. Romance becomes rescue, not of life, but of character. Rowan refuses to flee. Instead, he stands and answers for all he has done. His force turned outward had hurt people, yes, but his recent choices had also saved lives. Murmured's love, if it is love, is a strange, stubborn grammar. She loves the man who chose mercy over escape. The scene in which she places a repaired locket back in his hands is slow and tactile. The audience feels the weight of metal and history. The railroad's manager, a man named Mr. Winthrop, reveals his cruelty in a way that makes the town's blood run cold. He offers to buy the schoolhouse as a public good if the town will turn its back on a few families. The moral choice is laid plain. Murmured leads a petition, and even the sheriff, shamed by his ledger, signs with a hand that trembles like a man who has dropped something precious. The fourth part rises when Cullen Dre attempts a final move. He orchestrates an ambush to steal the town's petition and the evidence. A skirmish explodes in the narrow lanes. A child is nearly hurt. Rowan steps into the fray with a clarity that is almost theological. He will not use force to dominate, but to defend. The clash is gritty and human. It ends with Cullen captured and the town's petition intact. The melodrama here is moral and physical in equal measure. The part closes on the dawn that follows the ambush. The railroad is stalled for now. Rowan's fate is uncertain, and Murmured stands with him as he prepares to leave for the county seat to plead his case. She chooses to go with him, not as a trophy or a captive, but as a partner. Their future is fragile, made of stitched promises and whispered bargains, but it is theirs to risk. The final part begins not with a bang, but with movement, wheels on packed earth, horses' breath like steam, and a sky that promises thaw. The journey to the county seat is a crucible of conversations, small kindnesses, and stories told at roadside inns. Rowan and Murmured share shameful confessions and private jokes. Their intimacy is forged in the long stretches between towns, in a way two people can learn to read the other's silence. The county hall is a theater of forms. Mr. Winthrop arrives with a new retinue, and the courtroom becomes a stage for the town's souls. Witnesses speak. The Norwegian widow testifies about humane labor. Leaping Buck speaks of ancient law that respects people. Maggie cries as she tells of her children. The melodrama is at its likeness. These are not abstract pleas, but the raw truth of people whose lives would be uprooted by the railroad's appetite. Rowan's testimony is a turning point. He confesses to wrongs without seeking to minimize them, and shows how his actions later saved children and preserved the town's heart. The judge, a man weathered by the law, considers the evidence, the petitions, and the cost of progress measured only in dollars. In a verdict that surprises no one and yet feels like mercy, the judge rules that the railroad must negotiate fairly, that the sheriff's ledger be made public, and that Rowan will face restitution rather than a long prison term because his recent acts showed a clear intent to repair. The epilogue is not tidy. The railroad still comes, but it brings jobs in a way that is fairer than Winthrop had intended. The schoolhouse gets a roof patched by communal hands, and families are paid for easements at living wages. Rowan receives a sentence that keeps him near the town, community service, repair jobs, and a requirement to teach boys how to shoe horses rather than how to steal. Murmured and Rowan marry in a quiet way, without fanfare, a quilt, a song, a skillet of stew. Their marriage is not a rescue, but a mutual choice. The story's final beats dwell on personal transformation. Murmured opens a small general store that doubles as a post office and sometimes a secret study for letters people cannot yet say aloud. Rowan teaches the town's boys to handle tools and to measure strength by the willingness to use it for the common good. The children laugh in a way that feels like payment for hard seasons. The Lakota and Irish communities continue to share stories, and the town grows into a place that remembers its debts. The closing line echoes the opening. Force remains a memory, but it is reshaped, no longer the only language the outlaw knows. Murmured keeps her name, and people begin to say it aloud, not as a hush but as an address.